This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The hosts are not trained professionals, and their opinions come from personal experience, not professional training. In this episode, we discuss fictional depictions of trauma and violence that may not be suitable for all listeners, so please take care of yourselves. Specific content warnings for each episode can be found in the show notes. Events in the media are discussed in approximate order of escalation. This episode contains spoilers. In Aborson, the third installment of the Old Kingdom, Lyriel has been revealed as the abortion-in-waiting and Sam as the inheritor of the Wallmaker's charter. Together they worked first to save Nick, then to save their entire existence and come together as a family. This episode, we are following Sam across Lyriel and Aborson. Hi, I'm Nicole.
And I'm Robin, and welcome to Books That Burn, where we're going to be discussing Aborson and Lyriel. By Garth Nix, which is part of the Old Kingdom series.
This is our second week discussing these same two books because we're choosing characters and not just plot points for each of them, and our main character storylines kind of overlap.
Alright, so factions, mostly the same as before. We've got Lyriel, Sam, Elamir, Sabriel, Touchstone, the Disreputable Dog, Mogget, the Clare, Oranus, Nick, the Sutherling refugees, Hedge, and Clore of the Mask.
So jumping right into our minor character spotlight, Nick. So Nick, it was kind of, he kind of starts out kind of funky because he wasn't the intended target for his trauma. Mm-hmm. His major trauma was a piece of Oranus, just a tiny sliver, a shard, put under the skin of his finger that slowly worked it had to be very tiny because it didn't kill him doing this. It slowly worked its way through his veins to lodge itself in his heart. Which actually, now that I'm thinking about that, saying that out loud, that must have been like a splinter of glass. Like the tiniest little sliver. That's not very big at all. Which is weird, because Oranus is described as being this huge, like, miles-wide, giant sphere.
It's
at one point.
They moved it, so it's not miles wide.
I guess it's not miles wide. No, you're right.
Like, but they carried it on a cart.
But it's still big. It's still big. And the idea of the sliver being small enough to go through your veins and your arteries it must have been very tiny. But he had this in him, which facilitated his kidnapping, his distorted sense. Really, it's gaslighting. Distorted sense of reality, being told literally what he was seeing wasn't what he was seeing for essentially most of two books. Mm-hmm. His actions were not his own. Sometimes they were, but his senses were overlaid by the presence, the entity, the personality and the self in the shard. And so even when his actions were his own, his senses were not. And sometimes, Oranus did just take over his body, speak through his voice, walk his legs somewhere, just not all the time. And we call it gaslighting because in some few moments of lucidity, he looked around him and went, whoa, this isn't where I want to be. What am I doing? These people are dead. What is going on?
And then Hedge tells him, no, they're just sick. You don't want to touch them because they're gross and sick. Go back to sleep.
Yeah, it's a very... the wording I want to use is literal form of gaslighting, but it's a physical manifestational form of gaslighting where you're not just being told your senses are wrong, your senses are being hijacked to tell you wrong information.
Just, gaslighting plus VR.
Yeah, it's VR gaslighting. That's a horrifying thought.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he was not actually the intended target. This was slated for Prince Sameth. But Sam was otherwise occupied in the fight, and Nick ended up just going and the necromancer found him first, and didn't at first pay attention to which child he had. And I think that that's important because I think it's important to note because Sam wasn't necessarily prepared to stand up against that. But
Nick was not prepared.
Nick had no protection. Sam at least would have had both his parents who have full awareness, understanding, and like any kind of magical resources to maybe have helped him possibly. Sam is surrounded by people who are very, very good charter mages. Sam is aware of charter and free magic and has been his whole life.
Sam is a very good charter mage.
Sam is a very good charter mage. Sam might even have been able to fight the free magic by nature of being a charter mage. Like, that might even have happened.
But Nick had nothing.
Nick had literally nothing. Nick didn't even have belief. Nick was refusing to admit that the dead hands attacking them were dead. Like,
even before the
5 minutes before he got the shard put in his arm. Like, he had absolutely nothing. And trauma isn't less traumatic because you have someone who in your life who can recognize it, but healing from it is sometimes easier, or preventing more is sometimes easier if you have a support structure. And Nick didn't have that. The intended target did, but not the recipient. I'm trying to think of what all to say about this, because really, Nick doesn't even remember most of it at the end.
No, he doesn't remember most of it, but I would like to point out that that is also a kind of trauma.
True.
He just loses more than a year of his life.
Yeah, and his health.
Yeah,
also.
His health, like all his plans for school and everything got totally upended. Mm-hmm. His sense of reality is just wrecked.
Yeah.
And at the end, they're like, yeah, go back to Ancelsteer. He does...
I mean, we might talk about that more in a later book. Yeah. Sending him back there was not a, go about your merry way. That was actually a protective measure for him.
Oh, sure. It was a protective measure, but I would argue it wasn't. I would like to argue that it was. I would like to argue that it wasn't really a protective measure for him, though. Because it was you ooze free magic and charter magic. We don't know what to do with you. Let's just put you as far away from magic as possible.
I will say this, though. He was officially dead, and for all that anyone in the Old Kingdom could guess, they thought that going to the Old Kingdom would kill him.
Right.
It is protective for him, because otherwise they think he will die.
So when I hadn't read book 5, I thought that it had nothing to do with his well-being or safety.
Oh, okay. Well,
nothing in book 3.
Okay, that's fair. But also,
communicates that.
That's fair.
And so, but part of my argument is that because nothing about that communicates that, even though that gets softened later, even though that does get softened later,
your experience at first was very callous.
Because, being sent away, things happen all the time where someone's like, we have to do this for your own good. But when that isn't communicated clearly at the start, that sense of, I got shoved back here and told to live my life without magic around, pretending that there's nowhere that it's real. That's a very classic trauma for people who were ordinary, got dunked into Fantasy Zone, and then left.
Okay.
That's a very common trope, and I do think that it definitely happened here.
Okay.
Even though there's a reverse of it later, I do think it's important to look at what's in this book.
I guess maybe not a reversal, because it doesn't reverse Nick's experience. It just gives us context as readers to go, they thought he would literally be ripped apart.
Sure, people do things for reasons all the time, but I think it's very important to point out that it doesn't change how stressful. So when at the end of book 3, with no other information, which is how I was about these books for a decade, with treating the ending as book 3, I mean, I didn't know until 2 months ago that there was a 4 and a 5.
Right.
With 3 as the ending, we don't get Nick's perspective on how he feels about it, and he's just sent back and away, and it's like, I don't know what he's going to do now. And then it turns out it didn't go very well, which is why we have book 5. But I do think it's very important to look at it from how is it for Nick at this point. Because we know now that there's more stuff that's happening to him.
Yeah.
But as a character, he doesn't know what's going to happen. He's just been cast away, kind of. You know, he's met the people who are saying he has to go. He's met Sabriel and Touchstone. Hadn't really met the Claire, and so all these people making these decisions. It's more people making big decisions that'll shape the rest of his life.
Well, and also even the people that he met, even the people that he's met, like, he knows them as Sam's intimidating parents.
Right. So
they're not warm fuzzies to him.
Exactly. It's not like they're as bad as Uranus or anything, but
no.
Hedge and Uranus wreck the course of Nick's life, and then the just pivot of, like, go back. And no one's there, no support structure, no one to talk to him. I think it's important to address that.
Okay, moving on to our first main character topic with Sam. So Sam, we kind of get the feeling that my cat says hi. We kind of get the feeling that our third topic, which we'll talk about after this, kind of kicks off this second thing in a very real way, but that this wasn't a sudden thing. It was just like kind of shoved into Sam's direct like line of view and piece of who he is. So Sam, we find out, inherits the powers of the Wallmakers, which honestly, up until we find this out about him, really for all of Sabriel, we are given the impression that the Wallmakers don't exist as a bloodline, and that they physically put themselves into the wall and the Charterstones, and so like they're not people anymore. But then Sam, we find out, is the heir to their powers, their legacy. This is not a case of anyone in Sam's life looking at him as a Wallmaker and saying, well, clearly, you know, like, you can't be a Wallmaker because I don't want you to be. It's looking at him and assuming, because Elamir is the heir to the ruling bloodline, the royal bloodline, and they don't know about Lyriel yet. They kind of assume that Sam has to be the abortion in waiting because he's the only other child. And
they've got two kids
and two bloodlines, so obviously. But Sam is not the abortion inheritor. And he has a very, like, so we kind of talked a lot in the first two episodes with this series about how being an abortion should be a traumatic thing. They deal with a lot of things that can be very, very traumatizing. They deal with literal death. They have to deal with things that are constantly trying to drag them down into death when they are living and breathing, things that will try and consume their life essence. Just going into death is a scary idea, in general. And it's a little, you know, but we always get this feel of like, Sabriel does it and it's second nature and it's fine, Lyriel experiences the first time and goes, I'm home. Like, they fit, and they're literally bloodline built for it. Sam only ever went in with his mom, never touches the Book of the Dead, is supposed to. He's supposed to have been studying this. We kind of get the sense that he had, like, put it off because he was in school, and so he could, kind of do other things and not really tackle that part of his supposed inheritance. But then...
Hard to read the magic book when you're in the no magic land.
Right, exactly. But also, like, there's this very real feeling of, like, that's not what he's interested in. And then he goes up against, he deals with our third topic, and then he's told, well, now you have to do this. Now you're late. You should have been doing this already. And so he goes and he tries to study, and he can't even make himself open the book. He's terrified. He's terrified of death. He's terrified of the Book of the Dead. He's terrified of the bells. He's got some little itty-bitty tiny bits of training from Sabriel, but none of this is an exhilarating experience for him. And I honestly thought it was a very interesting juxtaposition, because our other two main characters have this excitement that comes with it, and Sam looks at this and has this dread, sheer terror, like almost fainting, dizzy, exhausted, falling on the floor, can't get out of bed, like depressed because he'd have to touch the book, paralyzed, anxious, just the whole cacophony of things. But at the same time, we find out that Sam is always making things, and he's always been making things, and his family just assumes he makes things. He has a whole workshop that is full of things and full of charter magic and charter spells that, like, there's one moment where Elamir comes in, and we are told that she looks around and she doesn't understand any of it in there. And kind of, I think the same thing, did we get that with Lyriel? Oh, no, that was just Elamir, I think. I don't think Lyriel ever went back.
Nah, Lyriel never comes to the tower.
But Elamir goes in, and Elamir knows 0% of the magic he's even working with.
Yeah. It's like, well, I recognize that light spell in the corner.
Yeah, it's like, oh, look, a lamp. Cool. But there's this very... I personally think very well literarily executed sense of repression of his inheritance, repression of his powers.
Right. And I would argue that it's not, like, yes, his particular heritage comes with this whole thing with, like, magic and stuff, but it's also, it feels like everyone's spent their time, like, ignoring what he was actually doing and just saying what they thought he should be doing. And yes, in this series, they have a pretty good reason for thinking that he ought to be the abortion in waiting, because
if he's not, then
nobody else, as far as I'm aware.
If he's not, then who? And then if something happens to Sabriel, everyone's doomed. So yeah, that makes sense. But like, and I had this thought, reading through it now as an adult, that this seems very much like a very stereotypical, almost closeted experience, of any kind, where this character has this thing about themselves, and maybe there are signs their family could have picked up on, maybe not. For him, there were, but he very much. Well,
I would argue that it's
very much repressed.
I would argue that it's a perfect stand-in for queerness, especially, like, in recent... It's a very good stand-in for queerness, because the problem was that he didn't know the label.
Oh, that too. Yeah.
So it was like, once you get this, what's this word for this unifying thing? And that doesn't have to only apply to queerness, that can also apply to, like, different sorts of, like, syndromes and identity things, and things where it's like it puts together, like, having the word for it makes all these things make sense. Queerness isn't the only one, but I do think that it definitely does work for that, because it's like, no, I'm not this thing that you thought I am. And if we'd had the word for it and known that this was anywhere in the realm of possibility, we might have figured it out earlier.
Yeah.
But we didn't have the word, we didn't have the structure for it.
Yeah. And I do think it's important here too that I think there's a good parallel too where like obviously this is not, you know, the case for everyone. Your mileage may vary, your circumstances may vary. But in Sam's particular case, his parents are not antagonistic. His parents are not doing this to him on purpose. And not everyone who is closeted or hiding or unsure of their identity, or not everyone has parents who would be openly antagonistic. A lot of people do.
Yeah. And then there's the point where this falls away as a good thing for queerness, because it's not like, I suppose maybe some people have, there was the gay one, but it's not like there's like the legendary queer one.
No. Well, I mean, and that's where it crosses into the fantasy book realm.
Right. And I don't think this is necessarily meant to be a fantasy analog.
No.
But
it's just very well.
Just that this type of narrative of being fundamentally misunderstood by those around you because of something where you don't have the words for it. That shows up in a lot of fantasy stuff. And one of the places it shows up in real life is in things like queerness.
Yeah, but I think it's important to note that even without an antagonistic family, he still didn't have an understanding or supportive one. Does that make sense? Like he did.
Yeah, they're not there.
Right. He did once he had a label, and more importantly, once he had somebody else who was taking on the identity that they wanted him to have. Which, like, I know some people who've had parallels in their lives with this, where, like, if they are gay or lesbian specifically, then,
it's okay because I've got grandkids from your straight siblings? Oh, no.
Yeah, I have friends who had that pressure of, like, you're gonna give us kids, right? Oh, it's fine, your sister has a daughter. Okay, we're good. Never mind, you can go be yourself now. Like, okay. Cool. And their parents were never like, you should be straight, but their parents were like, well, if you can't give us children, are you gonna adopt? Can you do something, please? I have to have this void filled. And like...
Not that gay or lesbian has to mean not going to have any kind of
No. But, like,
child,
biologically,
but that
that's
when
the
people
parent.
are worried about... Right. When people are worried about that, then it's like, oh no, it's not the kind of kid I thought you were going to have.
Or, oh no, you're not going to give us kids by default with your significant other at some point. You're going to have to do it on purpose. Like, there's very
rant
much.
For a later time, it's gross that that's the default.
Yeah. Also, it's that. But that is something that
I do see what you're saying, where part of why it's fine that Sam isn't the abortion is because
Lyriel shows up.
Because Lyriel shows up.
And it is a little bit different because, like, not giving your parents grandkids is not the same thing as the world dying to zombies. Because you didn't fill that role.
Within each family, the stakes feel that high. Or can.
Yeah, or the pressure for sure is a similar...
Which is the whole point of a fantasy series.
Yep. But yeah.
We're you probably have noticed we're big fans of magical analogs for real world problems.
I mean, that's why I like...
Because I dislike the narrative that fantasy makes you unable to deal with the real world.
I don't know. I've always thought, and this is how I've approached I always feel like fantasy is more real world than historical fiction or real life fiction. Because if you're telling a real life story, then you have to be careful because, oh no, you might say something that someone disagrees with in the real world, and then there are consequences. Things get sanitized, things get toned down, things get whitewashed because you want the largest amount of readers, and so you can't really... You're not allowed to...
Get queer-baited and then made very straight.
Yeah. So you don't want to alienate any portion of the population as a reader. And that includes your homophobic, your racist people, your, like, the people that are causing the problems.
Various flavors of bigoted.
Right.
Yeah.
And so a lot of I've always disliked fiction based in the real world because it never feels real to me. But fantasy, if it's not a real person, then you can tell a story that does parallel real things. And honestly, I think people make more interesting, more real feeling characters because they're not limited by, oh no, you can't mention that war because there are real statistics about it and people will argue. Like,
yeah.
So I don't know. I think that Sam's parallel is just very well written and very well represented in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving on to Sam almost starts this book.
And to be clear, by this book in this case, we do mean
Lyriel. I'm sorry,
leading into Aborson.
Yes, like the very beginning of our 2-book span. He begins this book with an attack aimed at him, and as part of rebuffing that attack, he goes into death to try and track the necromancer who is sending dead hands out. But he finds him, he's successful, and he is not even a contender in the fight.
Oh, he's not prepared. He did not go in with the bell, he didn't go in with the bells, he didn't go in with panpipes, he doesn't have anything.
He hasn't even read the Book of the Dead, like...
He doesn't even have a spelled sword.
No, he hasn't. He's just a person who could... He's not even trained yet. He's just a person who can wander into death, and wandered into death, and went looking for a trained, very, very powerful necromancer, and found him. The necromancer burns his hand, his wrist, by grabbing it with his fingers. And that whole encounter, he does recover physically. But that encounter plus, as we discussed in our topic too, that encounter plus just the fact that he is not the bearer of the Aborson bloodline in any way, shape, or form, combine to make death and going into death really just almost a PTSD. Can't touch it, won't touch it, I have to touch it, oh no, I'm reliving it every day, I feel the burned hands on my wrist every day, I think about death and I get a panic attack every day. Like, he's just going over it over and over and over, and he's almost forcing himself to relive it. It's not just an unconscious thing, because he's supposed to be directly confronting death and learning about death, and he doesn't even open the Book of the Dead. And part of that, I will say, part of that is not just trauma makes him not want to open the book. Part of that is a real magical thing about books like the Book of the Dead. They only open for people who are supposed to read them. Like if you try and force open the Book of the Dead, it has protective countermeasures. You won't be able to open it and read it. And they talk about that a little bit in bits and pieces in all 3 books.
Yeah.
So
only a trained necromancer can open it, and only an untainted charter mage can close it.
And Sam is neither. Well, I guess he is an untainted charter mage, but he is not a trained or untrained necromancer in any way, shape, or form. We find out here. And so, I will say that part of, like, the touching the book and instantly getting, like, shivers and shakes and being done, part of that very well could just be magical. The book is saying that I'm not for you.
No, because, okay, I think it's very clear, it's very important to point out that the shivers and shakes...
He read it with his mom.
The shivers and shakes... So, like, there was the, I don't want near this, and then there was, I'm ill from touching it, and I know we don't get a whole lot of before, but it does seem, from the way the narration does, that being ill from thinking about touching it is new and is from being burned by the necromancer. So I don't think there's any reason to suspect that that's a magical defense mechanism of any kind.
I think it is. I think it is both. There's other. Let me see if I can find it.
I was looking at the thing after Sam's in the hospital to try and figure out if it ever says what degree of burn it is, but it's enough that he was just basically out on morphine for days.
Yeah.
So my guess would be at least second. At least second degree.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't third degree, but it was not insignificant. Oh, he also writes a lot of letters to his parents trying to he's trying to explain, and then they as he puts it, they all go in the fire. That night, as he had done scores of times before, Sam unlocked the cupboard to the left of his workbench and steeled himself to look at the Book of the Dead. It sat on a shelf, shining with its own ominous green light that overshadowed the soft glow of the charter lights in the ceiling. He reached out to it like a hunter trying to pat a wolf in the vain hope that it might be only a friendly dog. His fingers touched the silver clasp and the charter marks laid upon it, but before he could do more, a violent shaking overtook him and his skin turned as cold as ice.
So, I think he repeatedly has gone to it and tried to read it, but at least it's still worse.
I mean, I agree that it's worse. I think that there's enough in here that it would make sense that it is partly the trauma, but also just partly the book saying, don't, I'm not for you. Mm-hmm. And there's, because also there's a one point, and I don't know where this is now in the book. He explicitly says that the only times that he had the book open and read it before at all had been studying with his mom. He had never studied any of it on his own. And it would make sense to me that his mom would open it and close it, because at that point he's untrained.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and he, and also, I'm not going to try and find this, because I'm not even sure if it's at the end of Lyriel or at the beginning of Aborson. I think it's at the end of Lyriel. But when he is given the Wallmaker coat, and he kind of has that revelation of, oh, this thing that I do all the time is my birthright. It's not just a hobby or an extra whatever. He stops being afraid. He's very much able to, handle, oh, well, if Lyriel's the one going into death, I'm not scared of death anymore, because I don't have to deal with it. That's not my job. And I guess this might fit better in our second topic recording, but, there's very much this, once he doesn't have to be the one doing it, a lot of that residual traumatic reoccurring pain, it doesn't go away overnight, but it's handleable now. It's bearable now. Is there anything else with Sam?
I do think so one thing with, because I feel almost like we might have had the traumas in the wrong order for this one. I feel a little bit like that, but if we,
they're also very intertwined.
They're very intertwined, but him, I think it feels like, I guess him not feeling like he fit in predates him getting burned by the necromancer, but it's complicated when reading the books because he gets burned by the necromancer before we get to see how much he doesn't fit in with being the abortion in waiting.
That's true.
So,
alright, wrap up and ratings.
Okay, for the gratuity rating, going through for minor character Nick, it's not backstory and it's not off screen. Is it mild, moderate, severe?
This
feels severe.
Well, we have to talk about the reader perspective.
Okay, sorry. Reader perspective, it's moderate.
Yeah. Reader perspective, I think it depends on how active your imagination is. I would agree with moderate, because if you
I
don't
like how you knew immediately that I wanted to say severe because holy, oh my goodness, that would be so terrifying.
Yeah, but like we can't
Yeah.
we can't go off of the characters.
The character.
Yeah, it has to be the reader.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's moderate because if you're not paying very much attention to it, it's probably mild. If you think about it a lot, it can get severe. So it's kind of your mileage may vary. Gauge your own, how active is your imagination?
Right. If
and
you
how
have
much
trauma related to gaslighting, then this might feel worse.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So Sam not fitting in.
Sam not fitting in. Sam repressing the thing that is making him not fit in.
I think in terms of the reader experience, it's mild.
Yeah.
Like, it's repeated. It's like a lot.
Yeah.
But it's not, like, bad.
I agree. I also would say, though, that I think this, again, is kind of one of, like, your mileage may vary depending on your own experiences, because, we kind of related it to being similar to being closeted in various ways. And I think if you are someone who has experienced that, this is going to be more moderate, or depending on how current that closeting is and how much you're aware of it, it could even be severe.
Well, to the parallel of being closeted, I think if his trauma had been both you can't do the thing you want to do and you must do the thing you don't want to do, that would go to moderate or severe. But because it's just, sure, do the thing you want, but you'd better do this.
Well, it's not just sure, do the thing you want, though, because he's being told, put away that thing and do the real adult thing now.
Yeah. Okay, I guess he wouldn't have had as much time to do what he wanted to do if he'd actually been doing the thing he was supposed to do.
Yeah, he would have done zero of that thing that he wanted.
Okay. So somewhere between mild and moderate.
I think it's mild if you don't have your own trauma regarding having to repress part of your identity. I think it's moderate, maybe severe, depending on how much severe your trauma was.
I would argue that this is such a good fantasy analog that I don't think it would drag that up. Because we're saying,
don't want to assume that about everyone's experiences.
Well, okay, but I
would say be careful.
Okay,
be cautious if you have this in your own backstory.
Right. But to be clear, your parents telling you to do something that you don't want to do. That's
not it, though. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about specifically closeting or repressing part of who you are as a human being.
And I'm saying that that's more in the implications.
Well, that's why I'm saying that's why I'm saying it's mild unless you've experienced it yourself and see the parallel.
Right.
That's why I'm saying that.
Okay.
That's why I'm saying if you have that particular thing in any way, shape, or form in your own life, be aware that this is going to be more graphic to you than it is to other people.
Probably, yeah. Okay.
Sam being afraid of death. So this...
this is moderate to severe. This is
a lot.
Because the thing is, he's scared of a particular way in which death is portrayed, but being
afraid of death is a thing.
Being assaulted and terrified of dying
together as a whole thing. Yeah.
That is, not going to say anymore because this is no spoilers. But anyway, that as the thing, that's somewhere between moderate and severe.
Do you see why I think we put these in the right order
fine.
Now?
Okay, I do agree. Maybe they were in the right order. The other one was just so pervasive, though. Anyway,
it's pervasive. It's just not as visceral.
It's lower key. Yeah, it's like the first gate.
Okay. Why this trauma? Is it integral to the plot, interchangeable with the plot, or really kind of irrelevant?
Nick, integral.
Integral, for sure. He is the reason for the season, so to speak.
Sam also, I think it's integral. It's interchangeable. Because Lyriel's the abortion in waiting. We didn't have to, like, there could have been one kid.
Yeah.
There could have been just Elamir.
It could have been Sabriel just not having an heir, and that's also a thing.
Right.
I agree.
Not irrelevant, but it is
not irrelevant.
Previously.
Yeah. It is interchangeable for the sake of the story. I would argue it's not interchangeable for Sam's character, but Sam's character is interchangeable.
So that's where I would say not fitting in is interchangeable because he didn't have to exist. Now, for the next one, granted that he exists,
him being afraid is integral.
Is integral, right. But if he hadn't been there, then that entire thing could have been reshaped and been something else.
Right. Care. Was this treated with care? Nick being kidnapped and... yes. I think that this one was, because it's not described very viscerally, and honestly, if you don't know what gaslighting is... Well, also, it's not done in a way where the reader feels gaslit.
Oh, no. We totally know what's going on.
We know exactly what's going on. We know that he is staring straight at that thing, and he isn't seeing it correctly, but we know what it's supposed to be. We are not being fooled at all.
Right. We're not being fooled. We're not being messed with. The only time we're being messed with a little bit is when he sends his letter, and he's like, la-da-da, everything's fine. But even then, we know enough.
Even then, Sam knows enough to know that it's not, like... It's okay. Right. Yeah, like, he's the only one.
So the reader isn't being gaslit, and that's very important. All right. Sam not fitting in.
I think this was treated with care. I think it's also... I would say... So on our scale of, yes, enough, not enough, and no, I would say it was treated with enough care.
That's what I was going to say, too. It was enough care. Him getting burned. Sorry, him getting, like... Okay, sorry.
Well, I mean, it is that moment of burn. That is the thing.
Yeah. Sam, yeah. So then the next one after not fitting in.
I am unsure, actually. This is one of the scenes. So I'm a very visual reader. When I read it, I see it almost like a movie.
I'm not.
I actually,
I'll let you take this.
If I am enough into the story, I almost see the whole book as it happens around me. From varying perspectives, it would make a very disjointed, hard-to-track movie, because I'm jumping perspective depending on the sentence sometimes. But I would argue... So, Sam being burned is one of those purely constructed but very visual images that is kind of... haha, jokes, burned into my brain. I have this very, very visceral image of that hand and the arm and him being held.
Also, is this our first burn in Books That Burn? I feel like we should stop and note this moment.
Is it?
I think it is.
Is it? Well, okay, yeah, because I guess with...
Yeah, it's our first burn in Books That Burn.
Yay, we did it.
Yay. Anyway,
I would say that if you are a more visual reader, this was probably enough care, but
I would say that books in general, because enough people are visual readers, good books are designed to invoke that imagery in people who will have that, and to describe enough for you to feel it if you aren't one of those visual people.
That's why I'm saying enough care, because this is one of those where, like, me in middle school or whatever, I would have been able to feel the feeling of burns from a hand on my wrist reading this. The description was good enough. I don't think it was treated carelessly, and I think it was important, and I think that describing it less would have made Sam's reaction throughout the book feel disingenuous.
Right. There need to be given enough weight to the event in order for the aftermath to play out.
Right. I don't think it was just treated with care. I think it was treated with enough care.
Okay. Point of view.
Point of view. So point of view of Sam's... Point of view... it's not Sam. Wow.
Nick's.
Point of view of Nick's kidnapping and gaslighting. Point of view of the trauma. We get Nick.
And we get what it looks like to other people when he isn't processing things. So I think we get
Nick and others.
Right, and I think, especially with something like gaslighting, that's really important. We get the perspective of the person gaslighting him, or pretty close to it. Third person, but tracking their thoughts.
Right, right.
We get the perspective of the person doing it, we get Nick's perspective, and given how, like, in a lot of traumas, I'm not particularly interested in the person who did it, but gaslighting is one of those weird ones where
that is important.
That's kind of important, and so we get that. We get the person doing it.
And also, with the aftermath...
We get Nick...
with the aftermath, we only get Nick.
Right.
Which I think is absolutely important. Once he's lucid, we only ever get him.
Right. We don't go back to Hedge being like, dang it, I was controlling your mind. Like, we don't have something
My
like that.
dark spell has been broken. Like, no, we don't get any of that. We get Nick and Nick's realization and Nick processing and Nick's horror at what happened, but like we get the victim. We get him processing the aftermath, which is great.
And we get Lyriel, like seeing him.
Well, not really for the not for the aftermath. We do for the trauma.
No, I meant for the trauma. I did mean for the trauma.
Yeah.
I was saying seeing him while it's happening.
Yeah. So for the trauma itself, we get him and others, and that's important. And then for the aftermath, we only get him, which is super important for what he went through.
Yeah. Like, Hedge doesn't get a voice anymore.
Nope.
Once he literally doesn't have a voice anymore in Nick's head.
Yeah.
Uranus,
Hedge never had. Yeah, Uranus doesn't get it.
Uranus.
Hedge doesn't get a voice once Uranus loses his.
Yep.
Sam's Wallmaker repression. Point of view of the trauma and the aftermath. Both of these, I think, are just Sam. No, I take it back.
Well, because we get other people wanting him to do things he's not doing. We get a little bit of that.
We don't get their perspective. We get him watching them order him around, I would argue.
Okay, so I think it stays just as Sam, really.
I think it does for the trauma. I actually think for the aftermath, we do see Lyriel noticing that he's doing better.
Right.
We do see her noticing that, like, he seems more confident and he's just doing things, and he's, especially when they get to, like, the final scene in Abortion, he's on it, and he's confident, and he's ready to go, and he's just doing what she asks with no hesitation, and he's just like, yes, I'm in my element. He's just going. And, and it's important that in that moment he is doing his Wallmaker thing, and he's just confident. He's just like, oh yeah, I've never done this spell before, but it's fine, because I have no hesitation. And I think that her seeing him, for lack of better words, seeing him live who he is, I think, also important. Moving on to Sam being afraid of death.
Sam being afraid of death.
Moving on to Sam being afraid of death. Point of view of the trauma is, I think, just Sam.
It's just Sam, yeah. I thought we were talking about both of these at once, because it's just Sam. It's just more Sam.
Point of view of the aftermath. I guess, again, it's kind of Sam Lyriel. Because again, it's like Lyriel noticing that he's not repressing himself anymore, and he just seems much better now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Our aspiring writer tip. So we have to think. What was our tip? What was our tip last episode? Because it was the same books. Trying to remember.
I don't remember now. That was 2 weeks ago.
For us, yeah. Okay. Alright, well, if we end up saying the same thing, we just really believe it. Forewarning. So aspiring writer tip. Any thoughts?
Alright. Trying to think.
I have one if you don't. But
okay,
I don't know if it's what we said last time or not. Let me know if this sounds too familiar.
Okay.
I would say that a really good aspiring writer tip is to think about what you want the reader to get out of your descriptions, because and this has been true in both book series that we've read so far, but Garth Nix is particularly good at this, and I'm not just talking about this series. Like, anything I've read from him, he's very, very good at this.
Mm-hmm.
He's very good at
visuals.
He's very good at visuals
and world building.
Yeah, but there's a lot of people that are good at visuals and world building. He's very good specifically at thinking, how do I want the audience to interpret this visual? How do I want them to experience this visual? He's not writing this because he wants to picture it a certain way. He's writing it because you need to see it a certain way. And there's things where, like, I especially love, in these books in particular, his descriptions of items that come up a lot. We don't get a copy-pasted description.
Like the Book of the Dead, it's always described differently.
It's always slightly differently. But if you take all those descriptions and kind of put them together, they don't contradict each other at all.
Oh, no. And like the way the Charter Magic collars are described?
Yeah, it's always different words, but they always make sense. And there's a lot of books I've read that have beautiful descriptions, and every time that particular thing or item or room comes up, it always alludes back to the same initial impression that you were given however many pages ago. It's always the same color wording. It's always the same sentence structure. It almost feels copied and pasted because the author wants you to refer back to your own memory.
But this is like more like he picked up the object and described it.
Every time.
And then picked it up again and then described it.
Right. And then picked it up again after learning a new color and described it again. And then picked it up after learning the name of that clasp and described it again. Like, it feels very dynamic, and it feels, and even things like, there was a sample of the book that I read during our third topic discussion, where the only thing we get out of this book, and as the description goes, is a silver clasp.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember that clasp being described as silver in any other descriptions. That clasp is there. They talk about the book having a clasp before, but that gives me it's a building description as you encounter these things over and over. But you always get the piece of the description that matters for your visual in the moment. And I love reading books that do this because I never get bored. I never get bored hearing about the lime green wall. Like, it just doesn't happen. I never get tired of that one object because, of course it's there again. Like, no, because it always feels new and it always feels interesting. And there's always something that I latch on to and build my mental image.
Yeah. All right. Favorite non-traumatic thing about the book? I like the surcoats.
Oh, yeah. I want one.
Yeah, it makes me want a surcoat.
It makes me want a surcoat that has, like, things that matter to me on it.
So, surcoat is a garment that goes over armor and has emblems on it. And in this case, almost all their surcoats, actually all their surcoats, are found for them by the charter sendings, who always know what surcoat they ought to have. And so Lyriel has the Borson keys quartered with the golden stars of the Claire, and Sam, I think...
Sam has the wallmaker trowel.
Just has wallmakers. Yep. I don't think he has anything else.
No Borson keys, just the wallmaker trowel.
Also no royal whatever, just the wallmaker.
Right.
I think that's important for him.
Yes, very, very much so. My favorite thing... Actually, my favorite thing is... In this, I'm gonna go with the Borson because I think I gave my favorite thing from Lyriel last time. My favorite thing in this book is, I think, honestly, Sam making the sword at the end.
Oh yeah,
just the description of like what he was doing there. I mean, again, as far as like details that make you care about the story, I can picture the making of this sword. Magic and everything. Like, it's just really cool, and it's cool to see him because he starts out this series like kind of a wreck and struggling to figure out how to even function. And at the end, you see him just being like, nope, this is the culmination of everything that is in me and who I am. And he's never done this particular spell before, but he's like, let's go. Like, I know what this is, and I'm ready to go, and I will figure it out. And then he does it. And I also really like swordsmithing and forging and metalworking in general. And so I appreciate the tiniest little bit of allusion to that a magical version of that.
Yes.
Also.
All music used in this podcast was created by Nicole as Heartbeat Art Co. and is used with permission.
You can follow us on Twitter at Books That Burn, all one word.
You can email us with questions, comments, or book recommendations at booksthatburn@yahoo.com.
Support us on patreon.com/booksthatburn. All patrons get access to our upcoming book list and receive a one-time shout-out.
You can leave us an iTunes review. This helps people to find the show.
And find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back in